Welcome back. The hashtag #WhoIsMuhammad has recently been trending on Twitter and Facebook. So let's continue that conversation here on the show as we explore the life of Prophet Muhammad. Joining me is Dr. Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center, to help us recap lessons learned from the Prophet's mission in Mecca and his migration to Medina. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So let's recap, because the last segment we covered various points in the life of the Prophet. We talked about his childhood, preaching the message, dealing with community backlash. So looking at all of those, I was wondering if you could share some, what beyond looking at the show and seeing it as a history lesson of the life of the Prophet, what are some practical lessons that we can learn and apply in our daily lives today?
Well, from his childhood, we can see here is somebody growing up as an orphan. And sometimes we look down on orphans, but Muslims are being taught in the Quran to look up to orphans and to look at ways of helping them. But sometimes we just simply help them as a way of helping them to get by, and we don't see the possibility of greatness coming out of these orphans. And when we think about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as an orphan, and we realize how great God has helped him to become, we realize that every human being has great potential, and we just have to do our best to help them to bring out that potential.
What about when he was preaching the message and the community backlash that he was getting?
Well, this is of continuous inspiration to us because, of course, many Muslims now in many parts of the world are facing similar circumstances of people questioning our faith and looking down upon us, sometimes ridiculing us, ostracizing us, and so on, discriminating against us, subjecting us to repeated searches at airports and so on. So we are comforted by the fact that we are part of a long line of succession of prophets, including our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who were persecuted by other people, but they had to remain patient in the face of such persecution. Our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, represented that in his own life. He was and his followers were being persecuted. They were being jeered at, laughed at, scoffed at. On occasion, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was pelted with stone. But he bore all of that with patience, and the Quran describes him as a mercy to the worlds, and he reflected that in his response to people. A woman used to throw harmful objects in his path regularly, but one day she didn't, and he became curious about her, and he realized that she was sick, and he went to visit her as an act of kindness towards this person who was actually harming him. And that shows the Muslim response that we should have even in our day. In our last series, we were wrapping up about the migration to Abyssinia and the Year of Sorrow. So I was wondering if you could recontextualize that conversation a little bit for us and what happened following those two events. Yeah, after the migration to Abyssinia, what we can see here is that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was sending his followers away from the scene of violence. Rather than take up arms and resist the oppression that they're suffering there, the Prophet, peace be upon him, looks for opportunities elsewhere, because one door closes, many other doors open. So he and his followers were looking for ways to escape from that scene of violence. The Year of Sorrow refers to, as we described, the year in which the Prophet's wife passed away, and also his uncle Abu Talib, who had supported him so much. So these two bulwarks of support had gone from him in the same year. It's referred to as the Year of Sadness. And now the Prophet, peace be upon him, must have felt much more alone than he had ever felt previously. But the Quran promises, "Inna ma'al usri yusra," with every difficulty there is ease. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, rather than focusing on his difficulty, kept looking at his role as a leader and as a prophet of God in comforting other people and helping them out of their grief, and trying to show them the way towards the brighter light of the future at the end of every dark tunnel.
So was there a brighter light after the Year of Sorrow?
Yes, in fact, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was taken up in the famous incident of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, the night journey and ascension, in which he was shown the heavens, and he was given the prescription that Muslims should pray. And we do that even to this day as our own manner of ascending to God, if not on that specific night, but here repeatedly in our prayer we come close in communication
an attachment to God.
So was that established as a way to deal with all of the challenges that the Prophet was facing at the time?
Well, it definitely helps because the Quran describes the prayer as, and remembrance of God more generally, as that in which the hearts will find rest. So from all of our grief and sorrow, we can, come back to prayer and we find a state of tranquility and peace. Peace with ourselves, peace with the world, peace with our Creator.
So once he got the commandment about prayer, then I'm assuming he started preaching that. And then what happened? Did the Prophet stay where he was, or did they decide to migrate? What was the next step?
Well, the persecution persisted in Mecca. Non-Muslims persecuting Muslims because of their newfound faith, and as they would do things in public, like prayer, for example, they would be subject to ridicule, the way they pray, the things they say in prayer, and so on. All of this would become the objects of mockery by other people. And of course, many of the poor believers who lacked influence in society or lacked connections with powerful people who can render them or offer them protection, these poor Muslims were being beaten and persecuted and sometimes even chained and killed. So what were they to do? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, practicing non-violence, directed his followers to migrate along with him, and he himself migrated to Medina, which is another town, leaving alone his hometown, which was that scene of violence, and migrating to Medina, which was some 400 kilometers or 250 miles to the north of his hometown.
And were they welcomed there, or in Medina, or?
Yes, in fact, there were people in Medina who were at war with each other, Arab tribes known as the Aus and the Khazraj. They saw that if the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would come to their town and establish his leadership, especially as the Prophet of God with a new message, this could be a rallying call for people. It would unite these opposing factions, and that there will be peace in Medina. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, undertook the perilous journey, and it was perilous because the non-Muslims of Mecca did not want him to leave in peace. To them, if one leaves his community like this, he's abandoning his tribal ties, and this was unacceptable at the time. Moreover, they wanted to snuff out this new message. They couldn't bear the thought that the Prophet, peace be upon him, would be free to go and preach Islam in another town. So they didn't want it in their town, but they don't want it to gather speed somewhere else as well.
So then he continued on there. And when he was there in Medina now, would you say that's where, Islam really built and they were able to strengthen the community?
This became an important turning point in the history of Islam, and this is why the years of Islam eventually came to be referred back to this beginning. So we would say so many years of the Hijrah, so many years following the migration of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because now the difference is that whereas previously in Mecca, in the Prophet's hometown, the Muslims were few and persecuted, now having established a polity in Medina, it is now possible and easy for Muslims to practice their faith freely, and also to easily invite other people to embrace the faith. And because of this lack of persecution within the Prophet's protected city, naturally non-Muslims can have a clearer vision of what it means for Muslims to live together in harmony and in peace, and how they can be of service to people who are not Muslims in the wider landscape of our global situation. And that made it possible for non-Muslims to also enter Islam and for the Muslim community to grow in number.
It may be obvious, but what are some overarching lessons that our viewers can take away from this, especially given, the challenging times that we're living in? I mean, some might argue that they're living in situations which are really, violent to a certain extent or challenging for them in the Muslim community. So then is the answer that we just move away as well, or could that be an option, or how do we take lessons from this for ourselves?
Well, of course, we may not always have the opportunity to move away, and sometimes it is necessary to stay and confront a problem and deal with it. You can't always run away from your problems, but one also has to be realistic and see what are the situations and what can be done. In the Prophet's situation, it looks like the Meccan opposition was like a brick wall, and if you kick against it, you would only hurt your toe. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, practiced the sage procedure of non-violence, of seeking opportunities elsewhere where the Muslims can actually live in peace. And we learn from this that hijrah is an important feature of the Islamic faith. If it's not safe to practice Islam in one part of the world, you do the best you can. But if you can migrate to where it will be safe, then this is what you do. We also see from the migration of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the solidarity that Abu Bakr established with the Prophet, peace be upon him. He was there in the process as well, accompanying the Prophet in that difficult journey. They could have been killed if they were caught. We also know from the stories in the biography, the books of the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that God's protection was seen to go along with the Prophet. As much as he's being tested in that perilous journey, he could see instances in which God is protecting them. For example, when they hid in a cave called the cave Thawr, he and Abu Bakr were there, and the search party of the opposition came looking for them, and they came very close to the cave. And some reports say that they stood so close that had they looked down into the mouth of the cave, they would have seen Abu Bakr huddling close to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in that state of anxiety. But the Quran says that in that situation, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was able to say to Abu Bakr, "La tahzan, inna Allaha ma'ana," do not fear, God is with us. And the biographers say that as the search party came very close to the cave, what they noticed a pigeon's nest, and they also noticed some cobweb, which made them think that nobody has actually gone into this cave, and they didn't bother to look inside. So with this natural phenomena, God actually turned them away from harming the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Abu Bakr. So a story like this is invigorating for Muslims, because it would mean that even when the natural circumstances may seem to go against us, we can always rely on the Creator, who is in control of all natural phenomena, and he can create circumstances even by such minor differences in the way things are perceived, such that he might protect us. And that protection may be necessary when we're traveling, when we're being subjected to repeated searches at the airport, when we feel that we're being discriminated against at work. We can always turn back to God and ask him for his help, his protection, and his intervention, even in minor ways, even in turning the hearts of people towards that which is right and fair and just. And in the end, we know that the test from God will be accompanied also by his saving grace.
This was very helpful to, practically look at the history of the Prophet and how we can apply lessons in our daily lives. So thank you very much.
I'm glad to be part of this conversation.